For this episode of Children of Heroes, we travelled about 2 hours south from central London to the beautiful historic Art Deco building of UK's oldest airfield in Shoreham by Sea, where we talked to Mr. James Liškutín, grandson of Flight Lieutenant Miroslav Liškutín.
Thank you for participating in our project Children of Heroes. Your grandfather served in the Royal Air Force during the Second World War. Can you tell us about how he became a pilot?
Yes, of course. It was in 1937 in Brno. He was fascinated with engineering and also with aviation, and he was given the opportunity by the Czech government to train. He qualified in 1938 and joined the Air Corps.
How did he come to England?
He went across Europe. I can't remember if he went to through Austria, I don't think so, but he ended up in France and then to England. And in England he said, I've come to join the war effort. The diplomats there said, well, we can't take you on because England isn't at war. They said, well, however, the French could use you. He was sent to the French attaché. He was signed up and he went over. He was trained up, square bashing as he called it, and then they sent him over to Africa. When the French decided that it was best to surrender, he and his friends made steps to move back across Europe quietly and move back to England and carry on the fight there, because they realised at that point the fight was with England now.
In the United Kingdom, he joined the Royal Air Force and became a successful fighter pilot. What kind of stories did he tell you when you were little?
Grandfather was very interested in the stories of survival more than the stories of shooting people down. The most important thing for him was that these were people just doing a job just like him. He had no hate for the Germans, and that was quite important to him. He was sent to defend the skies over France whilst the British were making their way back across the Channel and Dunkirk around that time. Now, he got over to France and they were intercepted by Focke-Wulf 190s. The Focke-Wulf was nicknamed the Butcher Bird, and the Butcher Bird was a very poignant nickname for it because it got that nickname through how many Mark V Spitfires it destroyed. The Spitfire Mark V was heavily outgunned, heavily outpowered by it. As he was turning, did a split S on one and managed to get in behind it and hit it. But then he noticed that sparks were coming off his starboard wing, and he could smell cordite in the cockpit, smoke in the cockpit, and he realised that he was being shot at by a 190. So he spun the Spitfire down into a corkscrew about 1,000 or 2,000 feet through a cloud. He did this to play dead, with the hope that no one would come after him to try and finish him off. He got through the cloud, and as he was coming out through the cloud, he straightened out and realised that something was very seriously wrong with the aircraft. So he was checking the controls, and he looked over the starboard wing and found that there was a hole in it the size of the interior of a small car. He managed to experiment with the controls and worked out that if he raised the throttle and pushed the joystick all the way over and bring his rudder to port a little bit more, he could just about keep level. This was over Paris, so he turned back for the north of France and to try and get back to England. The only way he could do that was follow the trail of smoke and the fires from where they had been intercepting the enemy, and that held him for the correct direction. By the time he got to the north of France, just before the coast, his body was really suffering. The amount of strength holding the stick over, he was just about finished. He was exhausted. At this point, he was also expecting some more attacks because the cloud cover had passed and the Channel was a very busy area. However, as he said to me, his guardian angel was with him and he managed to get across the Channel without any trouble from enemy aircraft, although the aircraft was losing altitude. He got to Red Hill and he was thinking, this is the point I need to bail out. But then he realised I'm closer than I thought. I can make it. Now, he couldn't slow down any slower than 160 miles an hour, which is over double the speed of landing a Spitfire. That is what they call coming in hot. He came down at 160 miles an hour level and managed to land the aircraft, but then another problem came about. The Spitfire is a tail dragger, which means that if you brake hard, it'll go straight on its nose and do what they call a ground loop. It will loop over, bang, and then pilot is underneath the aircraft. He couldn't use the brakes. So then he thought, how am I going to deal with this? And he started zigzagging all the way down the airfield, the runway, to waggle off the speed, which he did. He thought to himself, I'm not going to make it, but he did. At every point he said, when he wasn't going to make it, somehow something happened that allowed him to survive.
After the war, he returned to Czechoslovakia. What did he do there?
They joined all the squadrons together into one squadron, 313, and they all left with brand new Spitfires. They were excited to get home, see their family, and start their new lives. In 1948, the communists were having a ceremony in, I think it was Charles Square, and from what I recall him telling me, they were in the offices at Cabelli, and a good number of them were grumbling about the communists, and they're all joking and saying, oh. Somebody piped up and said, oh, why don't we all jump in our Spitfires and go and strafe the lot of them? And they all laughed and then carried on talking about something else. There was one person, they were a communist, and they went and reported this, and within days they were all put under house arrest. They were not allowed to leave the airfield for something like a week, and then after questioning they were all told that they could no longer be members of the military, and they were removed from their positions in disgrace, and they were ordered to find jobs where they were forbidden from using machinery. They quietly went about their business and tried to find work. And then one day my grandfather told me I think it was his cousin came to him, and his cousin took him aside and said to him, Miroslav, the reason you don't like me is the reason I'm telling you this now. If you are here on Monday, I will be feeling very sorry for you. My grandfather knew that what he was saying is, I'm a communist. I know what's going to happen to you on Monday. Leave. My grandfather realised exactly what had to be done. He sent my grandmother, my father and my uncle off separately, and he took his former Royal Air Force uniform and his former Royal Air Force pistol and walked across to the border. When he got to the border, he put on his Royal Air Force uniform under the guise that he was heading back to a German base or something like that. He then put on his best German accent and walked up to the guard and said, I'm returning and I've been seeing friends. And the guard looked at him, and as he got halfway across, the guard looked up at him and said, good luck.
In England, he joined the Royal Air Force as a flying instructor?
Yes. So he went to the Ministry of Defence and they said, of course, come back. He went back. Much to his surprise, they welcomed him with open arms, and that was good for him because he got this rejection and heartbreak from what had happened, and then he had this acceptance and welcome when he came back here, and he said it was like coming home. Then they sent him to Cyprus. He was flying Mark 7s, Mark 8s, and then he started flying the two-seater and training the officers. He then started being an examiner for senior officers to transfer over to jets. And from there he returned back to Britain to train, advanced training in the Meteor night fighters, zero visibility training. And his favourite Meteor of all was the NF-14. What I found touching recently, somebody contacted me and said, do you know that there are a few model kit companies that are actually distributing your grandfather's jet? And somebody actually bought me one of the jets. This is my grandfather's Meteor. It is actually one of his own Meteors, WS776. It's a night fighter, NF-14, and the black and red here is 85 Squadron. I haven't built it. I don't want to build it because I'm just so happy just looking at it. After he retired, I believe in 62, he got to what he believed was the highest rank that he was going to get. And he was called in by the Zambian government, who wanted him to train their airline pilots to be certifiable, fit for Western airspace. He took up the job and started in Lusaka, if I recall correctly. He loved the calling. He said for him, it was like his personal mission. He loved the people, they loved him, they were humble and hungry to learn. He had to set up an entire school of training from scratch so that it would have its own examination process, and that at the end of it, each pilot would be good enough for Western aviation authorities. He got as far as he could, but unfortunately there was some civil unrest which kept happening in the area. The consequence of that was that the flying school's aircraft, they kept being damaged or destroyed and disrupting the school. He managed to get it to a point where everything was back on track. And then there was a family emergency, and he believed that it was the right time to return back to Britain and hand it over to his most promising student.
You wanted to follow your grandfather's footsteps, but a car accident made it impossible for you?
I wanted to join the Fleet Air Arm, and I went to college in the early 90s, and I joined the Naval Cadet Corps to get a feel for the regimental training and drill. And then in July 91, I was on my way to the training ship, and I was struck down by a car which hit me on my motorcycle, and thank God I am alive. I woke up a couple of weeks later with my first officer next to the bed. When I spoke to my mother about it, she said, "Well, you won't be able to fly now, don't you? You understand that, don't you?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you've been out cold for a week. You were knocked unconscious. You had a severe head injury." I said, the military won't allow anyone to enter training if they've had head injuries. And my jaw dropped, and so that for me was that. I moved on to motor vehicle maintenance training, and then I joined Customs and Excise, followed in my father's footsteps. I really loved that. I guess I liked being in a uniform for starters and knowing exactly where I stood. From there I moved on to going back.
Was a singer?
Yeah, I moved on to singing, performing, songwriting in the evenings. At the weekends I would tour with my music group.
What kind of music?
Popular rock. We did okay. We recorded a couple of albums, we were on the television a bit.
You got a degree in film and TV and are still working
Yes.
in the sector?
So I got to a point with the music, I realised I was getting older, I needed a backup plan. My granddad was always telling me I must have a backup plan for everything. So that's what I enjoy doing. Sometimes in my spare time, I'll create little dedication videos in my own home, and I'd done one recently for the Czech airmen which I put on YouTube. I think I was missing Grandad a bit, and I had some film that I'd shot from Shoreham Air Show. I realised that it was going spare, so I found some beautiful music which an artist had done, and spent a week reminiscing about Grandad and looking through some of his old squadron photos of his friends and applying that to some footage of Shoreham Air Show. And for me it was good for my soul, and in the end it became a little dedication, an online dedication to all of those who served in the Czech Air Force, and ultimately all who served. I called it Flying Free. This is 312 Squadron's Tiger Moth from 1944. Grandad used to call it the Squadron Hack, and it's owned by Ian from Perry Aviation, who's a very good instructor. He took me up for the first time in my life, and he taught me how to take off with 0 hours on my life. And then he taught me, by the end of the lesson, he taught me how to land, and I landed on my first lesson.
How much your grandfather influenced your own life?
My father and my grandfather really are probably the two single biggest influences in my life. And my grandfather would send me letters all the time when he was travelling when I was very little. He was always there. I always had a real love and connection with him. I saw him as a humble man. He didn't have ego, and he never wanted to gain the glory for anything. But he always had a clear sense of doing the right thing and facing up to your responsibilities. And for me, that is one of the strongest things in my life, especially now I'm a father. I keep hearing little bits of him echoing in the back of my mind when I'm talking to my children, or when I'm thinking, what should I do here, what should I do there? So yes, an enormous part of my life. He will always be missed.